You keep thinking power is loud. You keep thinking the powerful march in with flags, tanks, and speeches. But the most frightening power is quiet, and it hides inside paperwork, exchange rates, sanctions, and invisible rules that decide who gets to survive. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The deaths of Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, and the ongoing suffocation of Venezuela are not only about weapons or ideology, they are about money systems. They are about who gets to price oil, who gets to print trust, and what happens when someone proves the system can be bypassed. And if you think this is just geopolitics, congratulations. You're exactly the kind of person the system counts on. Because when adults don't understand how power works, they become easy to steer. Love, work, money, identity, relationships, politics. It's all the same mechanism. People obey the rules they never wrote. They suffer the consequences they were warned not to question. They call it fate. So today we are going to rewind time and watch the same psychological pattern repeat across decades and continents, not with conspiracy fantasies, but with a cold look at incentive, the hidden self of nations, the mafia logic of global finance, the curse of anyone who dares to oppose the petrodollar. And you'll see something that most people refuse to see. The stories you're fed are rarely the real reason. The real reason is usually economic sovereignty, punished with theatrical morality. Let's begin. In the last episode, we dissected a simple idea. The power of the American empire does not live in oil slicks or oil fields. It lives in numbers, in scripts, in permissions, in the ability to create infinite liquidity and demand it be treated as sacred. People think the dollar dominates because it's strong. It dominates because it's trusted, enforced, and backed by a threat that no one calls a threat. It's like gravity. You can't negotiate with it. You either move inside it or you fall. Now ask the question that makes comfortable people uncomfortable. If that throne is so important, if the dollar is really essential to the world, then who dared to touch it before? Who tried to change the contract? And what happened to them afterward? That's where the ghosts enter. Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi didn't die because the world hates dictators. The world is full of dictators. Washington collaborates with plenty of them. Sometimes it even funds them. Sometimes it crowns them. Sometimes it calls them partners. So the real question is not why they were violent. The real question is why they crossed a specific invisible line. They died, according to this logic, because they committed a taboo in the financial mafia code. They tried to sell oil without the accepted currency. They tried to shift the pricing language of energy away from the system that lets the empire tax the planet. People misunderstand this because they treat money like a neutral tool, like a paint color, like a universal convenience. They think switching from one currency to another is just translation, but to a system that relies on trust monopolies, currency isn't a color. Currency is a lock, and when you pick a lock successfully, the entire structure becomes visible. People see that the god is just a man in a costume. The printing press starts trembling, not because people suddenly become moral, but because the mechanism loses profitability and control. This brings us to Iraq, to the year 2000, and to a decision Saddam made that was, in geopolitical terms, almost self-destructive. Imagine you're a leader sitting on a mountain of oil. You're also under pressure, under surveillance, under the kind of attention that doesn't feel like diplomacy. You realize you can't just fight, you need leverage. So you do something simple. From your perspective, you decide Iraq will not receive US dollars for oil anymore. You move to euros. For a typical citizen, that's a minor change. Exchange rates change every day. Governments do it, traders do it. It's normal. For Washington, it wasn't normal. It was a direct confrontation with the engine. Because if Iraq can do it, then maybe OPEC can do it. Maybe others follow. Maybe the demand for dollars and global reserves declines. Maybe countries stop needing US currency to store value. And if that demand softens, the empire's financial advantage becomes less automatic. The ability to print without consequence starts to look like a miracle that can be revoked. You need to understand the emotional psychology behind empire. The logic isn't just profit, it's fear of precedent. Systems don't only protect assets, systems protect myths. They protect the idea that the rules are inevitable. If a taboo is broken and the breaker survives, then the myth becomes optional. And once the myth becomes optional, the control collapses. So what happens next? The world is told a story. In 2003, the narrative is weapons of mass destruction. The justification is moral protection. The headlines thunder with righteousness. The justification is meant to make killing feel like medicine. It's how you anesthetize conscience. You wrap brutality in vocabulary that sounds clean. But the uncomfortable outcome, years later, is what matters. When the dust settles, there's no chemical stockpile discovered. There's no nuclear program revealed. The promised moral urgency dissolves like theater smoke. So what was the real transaction? Not public statements, not press conferences. The real transaction was compliance. Iraq paid in blood so that the lesson would stick. And yes, Saddam was executed in 2006. And yes, those executions were presented as justice. But justice is often a costume too. The hidden message was about discipline. Oil might belong to Iraq, but the unit of measurement belongs to us. You can sell, you just can't change the language of sale. If you challenge the contract, the consequence will be public, humiliating, and symbolic. A corpse hanging from a rope becomes an advertisement for obedience. Now here's where the psychological pattern sharpens. The system doesn't need to hate you, it needs you to be afraid. The point isn't to destroy you because you're evil. The point is to remove the possibility of your success. Because if you succeed, you teach others how to bargain with reality. That's what happens next with Gaddafi, and it gets darker. Gaddafi didn't merely want to switch from one currency to another. He wanted to build a new world of trade. He wanted an African monetary alliance with gold-backed currency. He talked about paying for oil with something real, something that can't be printed at will by a foreign government. And to Washington and its financial network, that is not just a policy disagreement. That is a blueprint for independence. It threatens the monopoly on trust. Picture the rage of a monopolist when another competitor tries to create a different measurement system. Not because they're jealous, because measurement is leverage. The monopolist doesn't just sell products, they sell the rules that let everyone else pretend the product is inevitable. Gaddafi wanted a gold-backed alternative that could undercut the petrodollar logic. So, in 2011, the West intervened under the banner of protecting civilians. It sounded humane. It sounded civilized. It sounded like the kind of intervention you can mention at dinner without choking. But the underlying fear is the same as with Iraq. If the gold dream becomes real, the dollar loses gravity. If the dollar loses gravity, the empire loses the ability to impose costs onto everyone else. It can't keep financing everything with infinite faith. So the intervention happened. NATO arrived. Libya was attacked. Gaddafi was killed. And his death was also staged as a lesson. And later, leaked communications and disclosures from Western offices revealed something that should make anyone with a mind for incentives stop pretending. The emphasis wasn't democracy. The emphasis was the threat of losing dominance in African financial stability. Libya was not only a country, it was a test case. The test case needed to fail. Now let's stop for a moment and look at how your brain is reacting, because your reaction will tell you whether you're doing the same self-deception most people do. When you hear stories about empires, your mind either turns cynical, or it turns numb, or it turns angry at the wrong target. Cynical means you decide nothing matters. Numb means you absorb it like background noise. Angry at the wrong target means you get triggered by the violence, while ignoring the incentive system. But this channel doesn't want your emotions, it wants your clarity. Here is what matters. A financial system is not defended because it's good. It's defended because it's useful to those who control it. When someone threatens utility, the system mobilizes. It uses morality as camouflage, because morality is a powerful drug. It keeps the public from asking what they're actually paying for. Now let's move to Venezuela, because this is where the modern pattern becomes painfully relevant. You've seen the headlines. Nicolas Maduro is called a criminal. Rewards are offered. Legal cases are built like weapons. The U.S. claims urgency. It claims moral defense. It claims it's about preventing illicit drugs. But now compare the moral story to the logistical reality. The allies and partners of the U.S. in Latin America, the people connected to major trafficking routes, remain supported. The financial and military pipeline keeps running. The moral language is not matched by consistent enforcement. That doesn't mean drugs don't exist. It means the narrative is not the driver. The narrative is the justification. So what is the driver in Venezuela? Again, it's the same theme, bypassing the money system. Venezuela accepts payments for oil in Chinese yuan. Venezuela builds direct swap channels for oil exchanged with gold. Venezuela explores a digital token, the Petro, designed to operate around sanctions and evade the chokehold of the Western-controlled financial stack. And that's where Washington can't sit still, because if Venezuela demonstrates survival without compliance, then other countries learn they can do it too. the system becomes hackable. And when a system becomes hackable, it stops being sacred. So the response isn't only tanks, it's not only invasions. In the modern era, empires often prefer financial strangulation. It's cleaner, it's deniable, it produces chaos while maintaining plausible distance. Sanctions freeze assets, they block access to credit, they create scarcity and pressure inside the country. Then the country becomes vulnerable not just politically, but psychologically. People start blaming each other, families break, trust erodes, black markets flourish, desperation becomes routine. That's how you weaken a society without sending soldiers to get bodies counted. This is one of the hidden selves we don't talk about. Most people think coercion must look like violence, but coercion can look like paperwork, like transaction limits, like delayed payments, like impossible compliance requirements, like financial death by 1,000 forms. And yes, a foreign power may also pursue arrests, freezing assets, supporting alternative leadership, and building an image of legitimacy around a future government. All of it becomes steps in an operational campaign, presented as if it's a spontaneous correction. In this game, the rebel isn't punished because he's uniquely evil. He's punished because he refuses to play by the monetary rules of the empire. Now let's talk about something more personal, because this video isn't only about nations, it's about how the logic repeats inside your life. When you break rules in your own world, who punishes you? Sometimes it's someone who doesn't even dislike you. It's someone who depends on the rules staying invisible. The rules are their comfort. The rules are how they get power without admitting it. When you violate the script, they feel threatened. That's why people who go against the system in their relationships often meet backlash. Not because they're wrong, because their freedom makes other people's cages feel uncomfortable. It reveals that obedience was optional. The empire does the same thing. Venezuela's defiance makes others wonder, why have they been compliant? Why have they tolerated the scarcity? Why have they accepted that the dollar is the only door? So the response is exemplary, a warning shot in the language of starvation and instability. Now we arrive at the next layer. Who supports Venezuela besides the US? And this is where your cynicism might trick you again. You might think the alternative is freedom. You might think Russia and China are allies of oppressed people. It's tempting. It's emotionally comforting. But don't confuse self-interest with rescue. Russia and China have their own strategic goals. They are not saving Venezuela because they love Venezuelans. They are supporting Venezuela because they don't want to be the next target, and because Venezuela is useful as a test environment for their own multipolar ambitions. Let's start with Russia. Russia sees Venezuela as a strategic asset. It's a position near the backyard of the United States, not just a symbolic gesture, a signal. You expand NATO, we respond elsewhere. You pressure us in one region, we pressure you in another. Russia also benefits through energy brokerage. When Venezuela is sanctioned, the Russian companies can step in to exploit access. Oil gets rerouted, deals happen in the fog of shadow shipping. Russia earns profits while also gaining leverage over energy flows. This is not charity, it's extraction with risk management. Russia wants to test endurance. Can a regime survive extreme pressure without collapsing? Can Russia maintain influence without direct conventional war that triggers catastrophic escalation? Venezuela becomes a laboratory for that. Now let's add China, because China's involvement is not mostly about planes or tanks, it's about financing, systems, and long-term dependence. Over more than a decade, China poured tens of billions into Venezuela. This isn't free money, it's structured leverage. Debt becomes a handle, and Venezuela repays in oil. So if the US tries to squeeze with dollars, Venezuela still gets supply through Chinese credit. It can trade oil for goods, for technology, for social stability tools that help a regime manage domestic pressure. But China's deeper goal is control through architecture. It encourages the use of yuan. It helps build digital systems like card networks and database distribution mechanisms. That sounds like development. It also functions as a surveillance framework, because digital systems collect data about behavior, access, and compliance. China wants to prove that a state can function with trade and governance that don't require Western currency infrastructure. If the model works in Venezuela, it becomes exportable to other nations. So while the US squeezes through sanctions, China offers a carrot: money, credit, infrastructure. And that carrot comes with strings. The strings attached to identity, consumption, and surveillance. Now step back. What you are watching is not democracy versus dictatorship, not free markets versus socialism. What you are watching is a competition of systems, a financial asymmetry war played on human bodies. And here is the darkest part. The people inside Venezuela become the battlefield. Their pain becomes data. When sanctions intensify and people struggle, strategists in distant offices observe response patterns. How quickly does unrest form? How does the black market adapt? How does scarcity reshape family units? How does misinformation spread? Which groups fracture first? Which leaders hold the line? The outcome is not just political regime change. The outcome is learning how to win without conventional war. So Venezuela is not just a country with problems. Venezuela is a teaching instrument for empire-level competition. And that's why you can't afford to watch this casually. Because if you treat geopolitical news like entertainment, you stop asking the real question. Who profits? Who controls the rules? Who is allowed to define legitimacy? Who gets to punish? This is where we connect back to the title theme, ghosts and curses. The curse isn't supernatural, it's contractual. It's the curse of violating a system that depends on punishment to maintain obedience. Saddam violated pricing rules. He paid with his life. Gaddafi violated pricing rules. He paid with his life. Maduro violates pricing rules. He is being starved, sanctioned, isolated, and politically targeted. In every case, the official story is morality. In every case, the real story is enforcement. Now, why can the powerful be so ruthless? Why can they act like there is no conscience? Because in the mafia logic of global finance, mercy is not a virtue. Mercy is a liability. A strong organization doesn't forgive, it disciplines. It makes sure the cost of defiance remains higher than the benefits. And if the system is stable, other people comply because they have internalized the fear. But if you ask for evidence, it's all over the place. When a country tries to move away from the petrodollar, it becomes unstable. When it tries to create a gold-backed alternative, it becomes a threat. When it tries to pay in yuan, it becomes a criminal. The narrative always shifts to match the enforcement goal. And now, in 2026, you might be thinking, what does any of this have to do with me? You might be thinking about your rent, your job, your love life, your anxiety. You might be thinking, I don't have access to trillion-dollar decisions, but you do have access to your own compliance patterns. Ask yourself honestly, what rules do you follow even when they make you smaller? What system do you protect even though it exploits you? Who benefits from your silence? What do you call realism that is actually fear? What do you call being nice that is actually obedience? Most people don't realize they are living inside a financial and social cage built by other people's incentives. Their cage isn't